I'm delighted to say Gregor Paul is back with us, a rugby writer with the New Zealand Herald. Gregor, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Everything you said came true about the game. All the stuff that we were concerned that you were plumossing us a little bit. It was all true.
Well, I think I predicted in the end that New Zealand would probably sneak home. That bit wasn't true.
Apart from that, all of the concerns that you had pre-match about how New Zealand were playing at the moment, they definitely were manifest very early on and across the course of the however long a rugby match is these days. So what lessons did you learn about the team, do you think, at the weekend?
Well, I mean, it wasn't so much learning. It was confirming what a few of us are beginning to wonder about the All Blacks at the moment. Look, Ireland played a brilliant game, didn't they? In terms of the strategy was bang on. They attacked the All Blacks in all the right places, and their execution was immaculate. I mean, they barely made a mistake, and that's critical when you play the All Blacks. You know, you can't give them any half chance, quarter chance, because they'll take it, and they did. I mean, they scored off one poor line-out throw and then one half chance, and they scored 2 tries. And you know, they didn't really deserve a lot out of the game, but they held themselves in. And that's another feature that we probably learned from the All Blacks, is that they still have an incredible capacity to. I mean, Ireland were dominating them everywhere across the field, and yet 10-5 at half-time to New Zealand. Ridiculous, wasn't it? You know, going in and New Zealand are ahead. And, you know, if it hadn't been for a poor Rico Ioane pass in the last 10 minutes or whatever it was, I mean, they might have won the game, which again would have been plainly ridiculous, because Ireland owned them. Ireland played all the rugby. So I think what we've had confirmed are a couple of things: that New Zealand remain vulnerable to teams that don't give them any chance to play off counter-attack, to play off mistakes. If you challenge them to say, look, we're not going to give you any time and space to play, they still struggle. You know, they were a wee bit unfortunate that Barrett Bowden went off, you know, after 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was, because he is critical to them in terms of that decision-making. But without him there, and even probably with him there, they're really struggling to use the ball at the moment when they don't have the time to do it. And, you know, their ball retention was terrible, wasn't it? You know, they barely put a phase together when it came out to their back line. But that capacity that they have to fight and to find a way to stay in the contest is probably more pronounced than even many of us here realised.
Their defence in that first half was actually excellent, particularly on their own line. Now, we were a bit concerned at half-time that there were some old failings from Ireland where we were getting very close to the line, hammer away, and there wasn't much creativity in the first half. At the start of the second half, there was obviously a good bit more creativity in terms of how we scored those tries at the start of the second half. But if you were to boil it down to first principles and to go back to that incredible defence and their ability to be very efficient on limited possession, there's a lot for New Zealand to work with. So what are the concerns about the coaching ticket and whether or not they're going to get the best out of this? Is there a recognition that we're in the middle of the World Cup cycle and so therefore New Zealand shouldn't worry too much about it? Or is the concern that those other failings are more terminal than the good stuff?
Look, I think we're probably on the cusp of answering what the longer term future looks like. So there are some mitigating factors here. So you've got an All Black team that has been away from home for 13, 14 weeks, whatever it is. And, you know, the coach can't say this publicly because he'll just be pilloried here for doing it. But, you know, no team in the world could be away from home that long without some kind of impact. And I don't think New Zealand looked physically tired on Saturday, but they looked a bit mentally flat. You know, they didn't have a lot of spark about their body language. Looked like they'd been on the road for a while. So you can't deny that as probably being one of those factors. As we talked about last week, they haven't been exposed to enough of that type of rugby in the last 2 years because COVID circumstances. Again, as mentioned, taking South Africa out of Super Rugby it will start to become a bigger problem, I think, for New Zealand, because they're not getting, you know, you come down here and Australasian Pacifica rugby here is very ruck and run. Like, it's high paced, it's dramatic, it's great to watch, but it's a long way removed from the type of rugby Ireland and England and South Africa are playing at the moment. So that's accentuating some of the issues. So we've got to think about all these things. So the answer will come. We'll get a little bit of a clue again this week because the All Blacks are playing in Paris, and France, good team, pretty motivated to beat the All Blacks in Paris, I would have thought, and they're going to ask a lot of the questions. So we'll get some idea about the resilience in this All Black team, whether they can regroup, find some energy and fight back and win a game in Paris will give us some clue as to whether, they're on the right track and they just need a bit more time at this. Or we're probably going to wonder if they don't bounce back this week, there might be a couple of players in there or a kind of feeling that strategically their whole sort of live-off counter-attack rugby needs to be looked at and they need to go back to the drawing board a little bit. So we're on that kind of, I don't think anyone's wildly panicking, but there's enough evidence building to say what happened in Dublin can't be dismissed as a one-off anymore. There might be some bigger questions to be answered.
Is there a sense then this weekend, Gregor, that there will be more of a bit more damage to the pride of New Zealand done were they to lose to France? Because maybe with Ireland you can make the case that, look, they lost them in 2018, but when it mattered a year later, they hammered them. Whereas with France at the moment, it really feels like they are the heir apparent to the World Cup throne. And if it's not going to be the All Blacks that win this World Cup in 2023, it's going to be France. And them laying down a marker this weekend is exactly what will happen should they beat New Zealand.
I don't think they'll be too worried about the next World Cup. But that's one thing New Zealand won't be worried about. They won't be looking at this game and saying, jeepers, if we don't win it, we got problems in 2 years' time. It's a hell of a long time. You're right. Ireland, comprehensively outplayed New Zealand in 2018. What happened 10, 11 months later? So that won't trouble them. I think what will trouble them is if they can't find a performance. And, look, all credit to Ireland. You got to always recognise that sometimes you don't have a great game because your opponent didn't allow you to have a great game. And there was a big factor of that in Dublin. But there was also some real basic letdown. The All Blacks let themselves down. Some dumb play. TJ Perenara, they All Blacks defend on their line for whatever it was, 5-6 minutes, hold Ireland out. They win the penalty. They win the ball back. They haven't had the ball for an age. They're dead on their feet and he taps the ball and runs and then kicks it and gives it straight back to Ireland. I mean, that sort of stuff we don't normally see from the All Blacks. They threw a lot of ball away early once they turned it over and got it back, dropped it, passed it poorly. That's not typical of what the All Blacks do. So what we need to see this week in Paris is a kind of just a reconnection with who they are and hold the ball through multiple phases, go forward. I mean, how often did they breach the gain line against Ireland? You could say, well, look, yeah, all credit to Ireland's defence. That's true. But you'd also still expect the All Blacks to play 80 minutes and have some passages of play where they put Ireland under pressure. And I don't think I've ever seen a game where, New Zealand scored 2 tries, but they created them out of nothing, out of opportunistic moments. Other than that, I don't actually think that they put together any kind of passage of play that had Ireland troubled at all, that went beyond 2 or 3 phases and put Ireland's defence into scramble mode. So these are the issues that will need to be addressed in Paris. And I think they'll make a few personnel changes because they need a few fresh legs, a bit of energy, Then we'll see Aaron Smith come back because I think, I don't think New Zealanders enjoyed watching your wee man. You have to help me with his name.
Gibson.
Scrum half. Gibson-Park, was great.
Yeah,
he was fantastic. Played really, really well. And New Zealand didn't have that because TJ Perenara is not that type of player, and New Zealand need Aaron Smith to come back and give them that speed and that continuity and that accuracy that was really missing. And I think, the big thing that came out was New Zealand's tight 5. I don't think they were beaten up in any way. I think they actually probably were moderately more competitive than it looked. But wow, they have fallen behind in how comfortable they are on the ball. You Irish tight 5. Wow. All of them looked like they were comfortable on the ball. They used it well. They were physical when they carried. And these have been the hallmarks of, New Zealand, the All Blacks in the last sort of decade. You'd also imagine that the All Blacks have had the best ball carrying forwards. But that's been the most sobering thing, I think, to see Retallick and Whitelock, Joe Moody, Nipo Laulala so outplayed by a really talented but yet physical Irish type five. That's a work on for New Zealand to fix up.
It's interesting there that you mentioned that there's no real talk about the World Cup, or no concern maybe about the World Cup in New Zealand. So at what point does the World Cup cycle actually come into view down there? Because it feels in Ireland that the next World Cup is in focus 3 years and 11 months before the World Cup actually starts. It's like a constant drama, a constant piece of paranoia in our own heads about what the next World Cup will hold, and every piece of success almost hammers it home rather than any sort of lack of success. So at what point does that come into view from your perspective and people in New Zealand's perspective?
Yeah, good question. Look, it's interesting because when if you go back a couple of World Cup cycles, New Zealand had a disastrous campaign 2007, and that was about the fourth in a row. But like Ireland, they had World Cup disaster after World Cup disaster. 2007, worst one ever, out in the quarterfinal. Sort of day one of the 2008 season, they were thinking about the World Cup. I mean, McCaw, Carter, all these big name guys had no other thought in their head. From 2008, we're all building towards this 2011. Once they won it in 2011, a lot of that stress and pressure came off, and they started to enjoy the moment more. So the kind of thinking about the World Cup process became later and later in the cycle, to the point where, in 2014, they weren't really thinking about the World Cup until they travelled to North, October, November, 2014. And that's kind of been about the time when New Zealand really flicks the switch now and changes the mode. They use that end-of-year tour the year before World Cup when they go up to Europe. That's the one where they start to, imagine what, create World Cup scenarios, where they're starting to look at who might make the final cut, the 31 that they're going to take, 32, whatever it is these days. So it's much, they've pushed that much later. And I think that will be kind of what they do again next year, although they are going to have to hit the ground running. So next year might be a wee bit earlier, because they start the season with a 3-test series against Ireland at home here, and then they've got to get on a plane and go and play South Africa twice. So, I mean, it's 3 tests against Ireland and 2 against South Africa to kick off next year. So we might see a little bit of a fast-tracking of their World Cup thinking, but probably really it will come more at the end of the year when they travel north again.
And could I just ask then, is there any sort of Premier League style knee-jerk reaction going on with regards to Ian Foster and his role at the moment?
No, because they reappointed him. He was initially appointed and his team on a 2-year contract, which would have expired at the end of the end of this week, really, after they played France. But they chose, the New Zealand Rugby Union Board chose to extend that contract after they retained the Bledisloe Cup this year, which was back in August. So they took a view that they were comfortable at that point, that they'd seen enough. So they're locked in for another 2 years. And it certainly isn't New Zealand's way to, I'm probably wrong, but I can't think of any example where an All Black coach has ever been cut before the end of their contract. I mean, they don't often have a lot of reason to do that. I mean, they've really lost a lot of games or produced a series of, a passage of play that's left you wondering, gibbers, where's this team going? So they've never really had big dramas to worry about. And look, it's a hell of a long season that they've played. They've been on the road for a long time. So, yeah, look, they've lost a couple of games. If they beat France next week, you'd be looking at that going, well, they won 12 out of 14, and 10 of those were on the road. Final 10 test matches were on the road. Wasn't really such a bad year. They got Ireland on a really good day. Ireland played well, but we've been here before with that. That's happened before, and it didn't kill New Zealand. So, no, I don't think that will happen. The pressure will build if they don't play well in Paris. And if they lose, that pressure will start to mount a wee bit.
I wanted just to go back to something you told us last week about how the Ireland game in the World Cup was a big emotional moment for New Zealand, because it was coming off the back of Ireland having previously beaten New Zealand. That was kind of in my head when we were winning the game. I was like, oh, Jesus, we're forewarning New Zealand here about the fact that we're going to be good in the World Cup in 2 years' time. Maybe it's too early for us to be worried about that. Maybe next summer is the time when, if we were to go and win a series or win one of those 3 games, that you might be able to channel that emotion, or the New Zealanders might be able to channel that emotion if we were to meet in a putative World Cup quarterfinal next time?
Look, I don't think that it took Ireland to win on Saturday for New Zealanders to go, oh my goodness, you're a team. That's what I was trying to say to you last week. That's long gone. I mean, that goes back to probably 2012, 2013, although Ireland didn't win in those 2 years. But they certainly pushed New Zealand hard enough, consecutive games there, to earn an awful lot of respect. So look, I don't think that will be troubling, or anyone here will be underestimating New Zealand. I think what they do want to get out of it, and Andy Farrell talked about this, saying, yeah, look, we poked the bear in Dublin and we're going out there in July next year, so we expect a backlash. Now, that's a pattern that's developed, hasn't it, where, Ireland win in Chicago and New Zealand come in 16, New Zealand come to Dublin and, pretty physical game and beat them up and get the victory. Ireland bounced back with a win in 18. New Zealand bounced back with a World Cup game. Ireland have responded. So they're in this kind of parry thrust, scenario. But what's probably troubling New Zealanders a wee bit is it's New Zealand chasing Ireland. It's taking Ireland to show the way, New Zealand to catch up, and then Ireland go ahead again. So that's probably what July will be about. It will be about New Zealand saying, actually, we need to be the team that establishes that we're the dominant partner here, and we want to win 3 games and send Ireland packing, thinking, jeepers, we thought we had the All Blacks all worked out. We had their number for a while there, but they've reinvented themselves and left us guessing. What is this team? How good are they? Because we're not at the level that they are at. We were last year in Dublin, but we're not now. So that's probably what needs to happen from a New Zealand perspective.
One last thing as well, there were a number of Kiwis playing for Ireland and playing very well at the weekend against New Zealand. How does that go down? Is it kind of no big deal from a New Zealand perspective? Are they a little bit, hang on a second, what's going on here? Or is that just modern rugby?
I think it's modern rugby. I mean, there's plenty of Kiwis, aren't there? I mean, we had Joe Schmidt coaching Ireland. He was a mastermind of the first victory against the All Blacks. So, I think probably we're all a wee bit used to that here. It happens all the time now, particularly when you go up north. I mean, Scotland's full of a few South Africans as far as I can see. So that's a common thing. Now, what is a wee bit surprising is Gibson-Park didn't really look like he was an okay player. He never really got a good crack at Super Rugby for one reason or another, injuries, other players, whatever. Didn't think he had that quality in him. So brilliant on Ireland for finding him and turning him in, because Ireland looked like a much, much better team with him at 9 rather than Conor Murray. And I'll probably be beaten up in Ireland for saying that. But he was the guy. He was Aaron Smith for you guys. He gave you that pace and that tempo and made Ireland such a more effective team because you were stressing New Zealand's defence with the pace that you were playing at. I don't think Conor Murray does that. So he was brilliant. And a few people here were going, well, he didn't look that good when he was playing here. And James Lowe, look, he got close to an All Black cap when there was a long injury list in 2015. Unfortunately, he was one of the guys injured, or he would have been called up and he probably would have played. But he was, again, a good player, but, maybe number 7 or 8, because there's a lot of good wings out here. But again, he was outstanding, and you couldn't help but wonder what the result would have looked like if Gibson-Park had been playing for the All Blacks and James Lowe had been playing. Would that have been a factor? And I don't think it would have turned the game, but it would have been interesting. Yeah,
it's definitely an interesting thought experiment. Gregor, great to have you with us. Enjoy the game this weekend, and thanks a million. We'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
It's Gregor Paul of the New Zealand Herald there. I'd totally forgotten about the game in 2012. So there's a 3-test tour in 2012, which ends with the 60-0, right? Mm-hmm. The first one is a pummeling. It's like 42-10. They beat us in the first test. The second test is 22-19. with an 81st minute drop goal from Dan Carter winning the game.
I've totally washed that game out of my mind as well.
And the Ireland team, still playing from that team who are in the squad at the moment. Cian Healy started, Conor Murray started, Sexton started, and that's it. Everybody else is gone, are they? Peter O'Mahony's on the bench.
I mean, if you want to read into that deeply,
Simon Zebo's on the bench.
What you could say is that the dynamic has changed a little bit, because in 2012 New Zealand were offended and appalled that Ireland would get to within 3 points of them, and they went out the next week and handed out Ireland's biggest ever.
Well, there's a red card for Jamie Heaslip very early in that game. Declan Kidney is the coach, and O'Gara comes off the bench. That's how.
Was that one more year, and 12 more months left on Declan Kidney's contract there, and Schmidt is in, isn't it? So yeah, it's
Schmidt's in for the 2013 game.
2013 game, yeah.
It turned out his second game.
So that's it definitely feels like kind of a changing of the guard somewhat. And yeah, like it's interesting, a number of things about what Gregor says there, but particularly the World Cup obsession. And it does feel that there's always this curiosity about Ireland and their World Cup obsession from outside voices. But obviously New Zealand had to go through that themselves for quite a period of time. Their ceiling and their expectation was higher than maybe what Ireland's would be. But you'd wonder if there is actually something to be said for their obsession just coming into view 12, 11 months before the World Cup. And take the Matt Williams thing from yesterday morning, which is actually distill it down to 1 year beforehand. Become obsessed about winning the World Cup, but maybe just start a year beforehand.
Yeah, and enjoy the moment now.
Yeah,
because it's hard for Irish rugby fans to enjoy the moment when you're like constantly worried about the big thing that's going into. Keith Earls is on that tour as well and plays the first and third games, but doesn't make the matchday squad. So there's definitely a link to that. We haven't done a 3-test tour to New Zealand since.
Not that I can remember.
So we've been in South Africa for that, and we've been in Australia for that. And so obviously it's like it takes
2 lines in the middle. I can't recall. It's one other thing that it's interesting what he says about Gibson-Park, that it feels that, you know, maybe what Gregor Paul said there was like, I didn't realise that Gibson-Park had got to that level as a player. But I don't think you need somebody from outside of Ireland to come on and tell us that. I think that everybody within Ireland is kind of like, did we underrate Gibson-Park? Like, I don't think he was available, but Luke McGrath was a Leinster starter for the La Rochelle game last year. Like, Gibson-Park, you can make a case, was not even the best scrum half for his province last season. I'm sure that there was maybe talk that himself versus Craig Casey will be in a battle for the third best scrum half in Ireland, whatever, a year ago with Murray and Luke McGrath as your 1 and 2. Then obviously you threw John Cooney into the mix, and it didn't feel that anybody would ever be saying that he's got to a level where he is leading the show and running the show against the All Blacks. So that piece of stock and that rise there is definitely one of the most intriguing storylines of this season from an Ireland perspective anyway.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what he's added to his game, how they got that out of him over the last 18 months, because I think you're right. I think Luke McGrath was definitely first choice at Leinster and might still be first choice at Leinster. The Leinster coaching ticket might have a different view than the Ireland coaching ticket, but it's very difficult to drop Gibson-Park from a Leinster perspective after the form that he's shown for Ireland. That's the other thing that has happened. There hasn't been games in the Rugby Championship at the same time. So the Ireland selectors are watching this, the Leinster selectors are watching this and going, oof, he's pretty good. It's hard to drop you. Whereas previously it would have been like, a routine 60-point win for Leinster. Luke McGrath scores 4 tries, runs the game. It's like, well, he's staying. He's staying, man of the jersey, you know. So, yeah, the dynamic has shifted, all right. It's 8:30 this morning. You're watching OTB AM.